Thank you for joining us. I'll start again. Good day, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the first installment of our webinar series on sustainable food systems, emerging issues. Before I begin, I want to recognize my co-organizer, Danelle Lee, the members of the Sustainable Food Systems Strategic Initiative Panel, and the UC A&R staff in the planning and bringing this meeting to you. Without them, we would not be here today. I am Mary Lou Arpaia, UC A&R Extension Specialist and Professor of Extension for Subtropical Horticulture based at the UC Riverside campus and a member of the UC A&R Sustainable Food Systems Strategic Initiative Panel. The Sustainable Food Systems Strategic Initiative Panel is one of 5 strategic initiative panels within the Division of Agriculture and Natural Resources. The mission of these 5 strategic initiatives is to unify, communicate, and advocate for the work that we do in A&R, including identifying gaps and priorities for future research and extension programming, and communicating important research and extension findings to the California public. The Sustainable Food Systems Strategic Initiative supports California by bringing good science and outreach to bear upon key issues related to sustainable production, safe processing of our food, enhanced access, and waste reduction. From the perspective of public value to the people of the state, the Sustainable Food Systems Strategic Initiative helps build California's economy, protects our natural resources, build capacity of California's people and communities, and helps ensure that we have a safe food supply. This is a 2-part webinar series. Today's topic deals with 3 perspectives on addressing food waste from field to fork. The second part of the webinar series deals with food access and equity, and we'll take a deep look into the topic of farm to corrections. This session will be moderated by my co-organizer, Danelle Lee. As mentioned, this session will look at 3 perspectives of addressing food waste. The topic of food waste is immense and very complex, and a 90-minute webinar will barely scratch the surface of this topic, but we hope it will give you a deeper understanding of this issue. In this session, we will explore insights on the factors that influence food loss and waste, delve into innovative recycling techniques, and explore statewide initiatives targeting household food waste. Experts in post-harvest handling, food waste recycling, and community education will share research findings and strategies. We have 3 speakers today. Deirdre Holcroft will be our lead-in speaker, who will provide us with an overview of food waste and vegetables. Dr. Holcroft is well qualified to cover this topic. She has broad international experience and originally hails from Zimbabwe. She completed her undergraduate degree and Master's of Science in South Africa, and then came to UC Davis for a PhD. She has a diversity of experience from academia to industry, and since 2011 has been a private post-harvest consultant on a wide range of topics, including food safety and food waste. She has been a frequent lecturer at various courses offered by the University of California Post-Harvest Research and Extension Center based on the Davis campus. Our second speaker is Michael Cohen, who will give us a perspective on extracting energy during food waste recycling. Dr. Cohen is an organics material management and agri-food system advisor for UC A&R in Santa Clara County. Michael did his undergraduate studies at Cal State University in Northridge and followed this up with a PhD degree at UC Davis. Michael is committed to helping all of us solve the problems of what to do with organic waste, minimize the amount of that lands up in landfills, and makes this waste available for alternative uses. Yu Meng is our final speaker today. She will discuss the results of a household food practice needs assessment, which she oversaw, and comment on opportunities we may have statewide to reduce household food waste. Dr. Meng holds a PhD degree in nutrition science from Oregon State University in Corvallis, Oregon. She is a youth family, and community advisor for several counties in Southern California. She has many roles within UC ANR. She oversees the UC CalFresh Healthy Living Expanded Food and Nutrition Education Program, the 4-H Positive Youth Development, Master Food Preserver, and Farm Smart programs for the county she serves, as well as at the Desert Research and Extension Center in Imperial County. She is also the statewide chair for the Consumer Climate Change Literacy Work Group, which focuses on educational needs of underserved communities to reduce household food waste. With this brief introduction, we will now move to the presentations. I will monitor the chat function for any questions that you may have during each presentation. Our plan currently is to have 1 or 2 questions following each presentation, and then to have a 10 to 15 minute open discussion at the end of the final presentation. Also, if you have any audio problems or any kinds of problems with this webinar, please, in the chat function, send a message directly to Bridget Alvarez. So with that, I introduce Dr. Deirdre Holcroft. Thank you.
Good day, everybody. I'm looking forward to talking to you on food loss and waste. I'm just getting it up and sharing and projecting. Come along. Okay, so I'm going to give you an introduction to food loss and waste, and a lot of my comments will be focused on fruits and vegetables. And I could start with a list of definitions, but what I find if I do that is that I've lost you already, and that's not what I want. So I'm going to start with a really good video that I like, not just the accent, but I also like the way this guy explains food loss and waste. And I'm just going to take it to where I want it to start. Okay.
Every year, the world grows about 670 kilos of edible food per person, but we only eat about half of that food. Now, I'm going to use 5 tomatoes from my greenhouse to explain the difference. I've skewered them up, and I want you to imagine that this tomato skewer represents global food supply. Now, first up, we feed a lot of food to animals. About 130 kilos of feed in the form of maize and soya and wheat goes into making meat. Of that, about 88 kilos disappears. Next up, we've got fuel. We make biofuels. About 15 kilos a year per person is making biofuels. Then there's a huge chunk, which is losses. There are about 139 kilos of food per person, for every person on the planet, that's lost between the field and being sold. And then finally, there's food that we waste in our homes. We each waste about 52 kilos of food every year. And this is what we eat, 375 kilos of food. It's delicious, but if we can close the gap between what we produce and what we eat, it'll be great for the planet, great for our pocket, and great for people.
And I think that really is a good introduction to, if I can get this to go down, to food loss and waste. And it's trying to play some other videos in typical YouTube style. I have to escape out of here and restart, so just bear with me. It does this every time. But I love that video because it really explains it. I mean, to look at it, to break this down a little bit more, if we're looking at the supply chain from harvest, handling and storage, processing, packing, transportation, marketing, and consumer, food loss tends to be from harvest until before retail, and it's mostly unintended. You can see that these definitions vary a little bit because sometimes losses aren't unintended. They happen Yeah, we'll go into some of those examples. And then waste tends to be defined from retail to final consumption, and it's usually good quality but not consumed. Now, sometimes it's poor quality that is a result of poor handling, and therefore it's not consumed. But typically, these are the definitions of food loss and waste. And you'll see lots of information like this. Looking at food loss and waste, 2.5 billion tons of food is lost or wasted. This figure, 45% of all fruits and vegetables not eaten, a market value, and a greenhouse gas emission. And I think I've put some of these up because I want to say there's so many ways to measure this that it's really hard to be accurate about it. And you'll see figures vary and contradict each other and are using different measurements. Another example is you could measure it in percentage of food that's wasted. Here, average 32%. In calories, 24% of calories. In US dollar value, and you'll see this value is different to the previous slide, or in tons. So there's many, many ways of looking at the figures involved in food loss and waste. I like this one where we're looking at the amount of loss, food loss and waste combined, and then the carbon footprint. And those yellow arrows are just to remind me to tell you that most of my comments relate to vegetables, fruits, starchy roots, but I'm trying to give you a bit of an overview as well. So if we look at cereals, it's a high loss. It's almost 25% loss of cereals, and that has a very high carbon footprint. Vegetables, also a very high loss. The carbon footprint's lower than the cereal crops. And meat, we tend to have a low loss, but when we lose something, it's a high carbon footprint because it costs a lot to make meat. It's further down the feeding chain, and one of those tomatoes he smashed was used to produce meat. Milk and eggs, fruit, starchy, roots, seafood, and the oil crops and pulses tend to have quite a low carbon footprint. Losses are worse in fruits and starchy roots than some of those other crops, but it's just a nice overview and giving some idea of carbon footprint. And it's not just the direct loss of that food itself. The impacts are huge. For example, and I've got it in metric and imperial units. I've never understood why they're called imperial. 3.5 billion acres of land are used to produce food that is lost or wasted. So that's the area of Canada and India that we plant and don't get to consume. We use 24% of agricultural water, which is 8.8 trillion cubic feet. 4.4 billion metric tons of greenhouse gas emissions come from the food that we don't eat, not food production in general, but everything that we don't eat. And that's 10% of the global greenhouse gas emissions. 28 million tons of fertilizer. Now, this is just an overview. Just think of the labor involved in harvesting product that we don't eat, the labor involved in planting, growing seed, particularly with high seed costs. So there are many ways of looking at this, and it's a complicated problem and not simply throwing things away. I also like looking at the stage within the supply chain and comparing it between different countries. So in this blue here is harvesting, sorting, grading. We tend to see higher losses in North America because product specifications and grade standards are higher. Handling, transport, and storage is a little bit higher in sub-Saharan Africa. I've chosen sub-Saharan Africa because that's my region. Processing, very high losses in sub-Saharan Africa compared to North America. Distribution, about the same between the two. In home, there's a lot more losses in North America than you would see in sub-Saharan Africa. And the result is that more food is consumed in North America of what we produce than in sub-Saharan Africa because there are more losses along the way there. Now, this is a lot of information, but I don't like some of the generalities that come in food loss and waste. So I try to go and find real research to show you some of those factors. And this is a paper done in 2021 looking at the reasons or the causes of food loss and waste. And they highlighted a couple of main factors: poor handling and operational performance, inadequate or defective packaging, lack of storage facilities, lack of coordination and information sharing, and inadequate transportation systems. Okay, but the root causes, there's a lot. Those are the ones that really stand out. But I want to go back along that chain and just look at certain areas along the way. So if we're looking at harvest, what is lost at harvest? And there's some estimates in the US of typical losses at harvest, but it doesn't take into account, it's not always very accurate. I'll give you some updated figures on that. But we have a difficulty. For example, this field of cabbages was left unharvested. It should have yielded or would have yielded 4,500 pounds per acre of really edible, fresh, undamaged product. But on top of the production cost, there's also the harvest costs. They're harvested by hand. They're usually boxed, cooled, and shipped. And what happens was the sale price was actually below the cost of harvesting, so the field wasn't harvested at all. I don't have a solution for situations like that, because usually when there's a glut in the market, there's also a glut in donations. But this is an area where it may be possible to go to alternatives, to find some food bank that'll come in and harvest some of that product. But until we understand the size of the problem, we're never going to manage it. That same researcher is releasing the Global Farm Loss Calculator. I think it's called, my title is covered by the screen share. They're going to launch that in April of this year. And this is just some data to show what will be involved in that. And all it does is measure where the losses are occurring at a farm. On that assumption, if we can measure it, we can start to manage it. So it's not real data, and I'm certainly not going to walk you through this amount of data. It's just to display what they can do. The same group has come through and looked at both edible and marketable crop after it's been commercially harvested. So on average, 16% of commercially harvested yield is still marketable. That didn't come out right. So, after they've done a commercial harvest, there's still an additional 16% that could be marketable if it had been harvested. And there was a 42% on average that was edible, maybe not meeting the product specifications, but was still edible. So that's the averages, 16 and 42%. Let's have a look. In watermelon, it's pretty high. There was over 40% additional that could have been marketed, and another 80% that could have been used that was sort of wonky fruit that could maybe reach a secondary market. And going down the crops, cucumber, sweet corn, still quite high. Cabbage, summer squash, much, much lower losses in terms of marketable, and also lower in terms of what was edible. But it's good to have this kind of data, because from this, then there's an ability to be able to measure and get an idea of how to solve this problem. I'm hoping people on the call will have ideas of how to deal with what's left in the field and not harvested. As I said, I really like to look at real data and not opinions. This is a tomato supply chain. It's based in Australia. And the researchers compared two tomato supply chains of similar size, where they produced about 4,500 tons of tomatoes per year. And this green one here, when they were making the decision to harvest, the produce specifications for that market were much, much higher. So they had a 47% loss at harvest. So that's tomatoes that were still edible and undamaged, but they didn't meet the specs. On the other hand, the blue supply chain was at 29%. If you go through the rest of the supply chain, they're losing about 8% in the pack house, nothing at wholesale, a little bit at retail. But in the end, we've got from the blue supply chain, where product specs were looser, we got almost 60% available for consumption. Whereas when we've got very strict product specs, it's a 44% available for consumption. So I've been talking more on the upstream side of the supply chain. And now I'm going to talk about the further down from retail on. And looking at it, retail accounts for about 13% of food waste. So now I'm only talking food waste. So you see how these figures vary depending on where you're getting it from, and it gets kind of confusing. Food service accounts for 26% and households 61% of food waste. The global average, 74 kilograms per capita per year of food waste. Sorry, I left that one in kilograms. Now, this data is getting a little old, 2011, but it's still interesting to see food waste by region. And you can see that food waste is high in North America, Oceania, Europe, a bit less so China, Japan, and Korea, and going down sub-Saharan Africa. The food waste at the second half of the supply chain is much lower. And there's a really interesting paper in 2015 looking at supermarket waste. And I'm just going to make a comment on these photographs that I have here. There's a guy that I follow on LinkedIn because he does quite a lot of dumpster diving. I think he's in some Nordic country. But there's an example of all the cheese that he rescued from the dumpster that was still edible and laid out on the floor at his house. And there's some of the fruits and vegetables that he photographed from the dumpsters. Okay, so there's quite a lot of loss at the supermarket. If I focus in on vegetables, it varies between 2 and 62%. So sweet corn to turnip greens covers the range of losses in the supermarket. In the fruit side, it's a 4% loss on banana, up to a 43% in papaya. I'm going to dig deeper into that fruit data just to show you that it's a little more complicated than it first seems. Okay, we see here banana, 4% retail shrink, papaya, 43%, and there's some variation with the others. But that's not the whole story. There they've measured shrink in percentage only. If we look at shrink in terms of millions of pounds lost per year, the biggest loss is in tomatoes. There's a lot of tomato that goes through the retail market. Is a 15% shrink, but it's a big volume. It accounts for a big volume of loss. Whereas banana, it's kind of a moderate volume compared to the others, 209 million pounds per year. Kiwi fruit has the lowest loss, and probably because we actually sell relatively little in terms of pounds of kiwi fruit a year. And papaya is also pretty low. But it's kind of interesting to see why some of these figures vary so much and to get a grip on actual data and not opinions. I find the interaction between packaging and food loss quite interesting. And 45% of materials in a landfill in the US are either food and the packaging associated with food. So that's quite a huge amount. If you think about what you generate in a house alone, it's quite a high amount of food and food packaging. 59% of the plastic waste in Europe comes from packaging, and they generate about 174 kilograms per person of packaging waste in the EU, just to give you some figures on that. There's some interesting moves in Europe of banning single-use packaging in many countries, resulting in some alternatives. And I remember in many countries they will sell a 6-pack of apples with a polystyrene tray overwrapped in plastic. And this is the new container with a cardboard container. There's some compostable packaging. And also I'm seeing a little more cardboard and wood being used. Not completely free of plastic, even though that ban in France came in, I think 2 years ago. I still see plastic in the supermarket. But that is a little, there's a lot more nuances in this whole packaging and food waste. Some of the packaging systems that have a lower environmental impact may result in a higher food waste. And those that have a reduced food waste may have a higher environmental impact. I was of the opinion that changing from plastic to cardboard would be ideal, but actually even that is nuanced. Because if we replace plastic with materials that have a higher carbon footprint and are not even actually biodegradable in real life conditions, we haven't solved the problem. And the energy to produce a ton of paper is 5,000 kilowatt hours. A ton of low density polyethylene or plastic packaging is half that energy. And the amount of water required to produce a metric ton of paper is pretty high as well. So again, it's a lot more nuanced. And I would really like that data to help us make informed decisions of what kind of packaging we need to be using to reduce food waste and what is best for the environment. I included some new data here because I found it interesting. There was a food diary study from 37 households. So they looked at what people are losing out of a house alone, and then looking what percentage of that can be attributed to packaging. So it's interesting, the loss was very high in fruits and vegetables. I've got to move my things around so I can see it. And of that, 7% was attributed to packaging. In dairy, 68% was attributed to packaging. In meat and fish, we had a lower losses, but 50% packaging. In staples, condiments, snacks, fairly high loss, and 80% of that was attributable to packaging. So why is packaging so important? And it seemed in the study, they said there was either too much in a packet. The packet was too large for the typical household size. They also include data on household size. So a very big households didn't have this problem. They didn't report this problem and they had less waste. But if it's 1, 2, 3 people in a household, there can be a lot more waste from it. Defective or broken packaging. And in the dairy particularly, it was difficult to empty the packages. Okay. And another comment that I want to make, because it ties in so well with this, is date labels. And I love this. I picked this up, I think, on LinkedIn as well, where they're selling the salt that's more than 250 million years ago, but it has a date label on. And how can that really expire? There's a very good study out of the Waste and Resources Action Program in the UK, where they looked at products that were packed with a date and without a date. So looking at apples, if it was packed without a date, 7% was thrown out because it was slightly less than perfect. But when it had a best of use by date, 46% was thrown away. And they got, and the ones that didn't have a best of use by date, they had 28 days more on apples. On bananas without a date, 2%. With a date, 29%. And I still haven't quite figured out how they got 13 days extra on a banana. I'm assuming they might have put it in the fridge. Broccoli, without a date, 36% loss. With a date, 69% loss. So the conclusions of that study was, it's actually better to sell produce loose unless you can show that the plastic packaging actually contributes something in reducing food waste. They also concluded that it's better not to use a date label on uncut product. Okay, it's different on fresh cut where you need some idea of safety, but on a whole apple, if we've lost the ability to decide whether you should eat an apple or not, it's kind of sad. And then they said if they could provide guidance to people on storing product at home, they could reduce household waste considerably, plastic waste, and carbon dioxide emissions. So interesting data to back up some decisions we could make. Many people have asked me why I'm interested in food loss and waste. And I think because in fruits and vegetables, it is actually the consequence of post-harvest technology. So it used to be really hard to tell people, well, I work in the post-harvest science, and they'd say, really? But if you say, I work at reducing food loss and waste, they really understand. So all the things that we think about in post-harvest are really important in this. Temperature management, packaging, respiration, ethylene, refrigeration, grading, all those factors. And it's also interesting to look at the United Nations Sustainable Development Goal, where they have a target to halve the per capita food waste. So that's the retail and consumer waste, and reduce food losses. That's production and supply chains. If we could halve that by 2030, we would have 22% of the food that we're going to need to feed the world population of 9 billion. So that's without adding any more water, fertilizer, labor, just by halving food loss and waste. And I think we forget sometimes how many people in the world still go hungry and how many people lack a healthy diet. So there's so much more literature. When the professor that both Mary Lou and I studied under first started talking about loss and waste in fruits and vegetables, there wasn't a lot of information. But now we really see a lot more awareness of it and a lot more information out there on this topic. And I'm going to make one parting comment here. There is no leaf that comes out of an apple at that level. So I hate it when not only we have technically incorrect information, but also technically incorrect photographs. That was just an aside. But thank you for your attention. I look forward to questions.
Thanks, Deirdre. We have two sort of interconnected questions that came up. So I'll read both of them and then you can maybe respond. It said, in the data that presented, is this just conventional commodities and crops from larger scale operations? The second question is, are there differences in food loss waste between large scale farms who use distributors compared to smaller farms selling direct to the consumer? Is there any data out there on that?
Okay, I'm going to answer the second one, and then you'll have to remind me of the first one because my memory is terrible. I haven't seen data on the smaller supply chains, like a CSA, a community-supported agriculture. I imagine that you've got much less loss because people will accept things that aren't meeting those grade standards. So yes, a lot of the comments are applied to the more classic distribution chains. It's interesting too, living in a European town, because every week there's a market, and in that market they will sell things that are ugly, that wouldn't meet the specs of a supermarket, but there's a market for that type of product because we know that doesn't affect taste. Sometimes it can affect shelf life, but then you can make the decision. So it's very hard to find data that's not within a supply chain. But then if we think about most consumers, they're buying things that come through a pretty conventional supply chain. Even organic supply chains are following the same. I hate to use the word conventional right now because it sort of gives a wrong impression, but even the organic production goes through a supply chain. And the first question was? The
first one was the data that you presented, is it primarily sourced from conventional commodities, not organic? I guess conventional here is not organic, and only from large scale producers.
Well, considering organic makes up about 14% of consumption, the data will be predominantly conventional, but in most of that data, it's not discriminating between the one or the other. I can't see that there would be a difference in food loss and waste between those two. It's kind of hard to answer that one unless it's in a very short chain distribution chain. So again, that's sort of community supported agriculture, organic product. Yeah, maybe we're getting less losses, but otherwise you might even have more.
Well, the other thing I was thinking about, you were showing global data, so not like in less developed areas of the world, you're not going to have these large egg producers. Most of the product is coming from smaller producers. And so even there we see, maybe for other reasons, loss is equal or greater.
Yeah, sometimes greater. I mean, one of the things I didn't comment on is that I was part of the series 2030 scoping review, trying to look at solutions for losses in developing countries. And you see some really high losses in those more smaller, organic, short chain handling systems, mainly because refrigeration is not used.
And then finally, right before we go to Michael, the other question would be to reduce waste. Do you think that by limiting how much we actually grow, so like if we have so much left in the field on the watermelons, if we just grew less watermelons and picked them all?
That's such a difficult one because it's that whole growing for a market and the market disappears. So you'll have a shortage of products, so people grow more, and then there's too much. So I think growing less isn't going to solve the problem, considering there's still people that aren't getting enough food. There's a food distribution problem. I mean, where we grow isn't necessarily where we need to eat it, but that it's so tied with the economics that it's hard to make a statement that says we should grow less. I mean, quite often, say in tomatoes, we produce a crop and it doesn't get harvested because there's a glut on the market, and we don't it's not worth the while harvesting it. Yeah, that's why it's such a difficult topic to deal with at that upstream level of production.
Thank you, Deirdre. That was a wonderful introduction to the topic. And we'll segue into our next speaker, Michael Cohen, who's going to give us a perspective on what to do with agricultural food waste, so how to repurpose it rather than going to landfill. Michael.
Thank you, Mary Lou. All right, hello everyone out there. Well, a little background. You can see the title of the talk here, and I'm presently in Santa Clara County, and we are under SB 1383 here in California. This is Senate Bill 1383, which has some teeth in it, and what it's requiring is that we divert organics from landfill down to 25% of what it was in 2014. Now, some municipalities could see the writing on the wall, and Santa Clara County would be one of them. The city of San Jose falls within the county and is right there with them. Others really don't even have a composting or separation system set up yet. So just want to go over this as perhaps a model of what could be done in other municipalities. And I'm going to talk to you about two facilities that deal with food waste. First one on the left there is a dry anaerobic digestion facility, and the second is a composting facility. So these are situated, as you can see, 45 miles from each other. The dry AD facility built on old landfill up in San Jose, and the composting facility is down in the southern part of the county in Gilroy. And well, the first one, simply what it does is it takes food waste. It can from the city of San Jose. It takes up to 650 tons per day and turns that into digestate and bioenergy. And that digestate is then taken to the composting facility way down there in Gilroy, combined with food waste from other cities in the county, and composted. So one of the things I want to discuss today, not just the process itself, we'll go over that, but some potential for improvements and even research on that could lead to improvements. And one is discussing sulfide scrubbing of the biogas that comes off of the anaerobic digestion facility. And at the composting facility, something that has been receiving some publicity lately and shows a lot of promise is adding biochar in small amounts to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from the composting process. Okay, a little bit on Well, the energetics of all this, there's some on the right from Khan Academy, just showing energy transfers through the biological web. And so, as you know, sun fixes energy, puts it onto carbon, takes carbon dioxide and holds it into sugars and other biological compounds. You know, consumers, decomposers will break that down. And all these processes along the way, more energy is lost as heat than it's conserved in chemical bonds. But really what we want to talk about here is what the decomposers do and how some of that can be exploited for our needs in a controlled environment like an anaerobic digestion facility. And what else are you going to know? It's let me just get forward the slide here. That it really under anaerobic conditions, you're going to produce both methane and CO2, and that is what this facility is designed to carry out in a controlled setting where they can harvest the methane, combust it in 2 generators on site, and turn that into electricity. And then, of course, just to and that electricity at this plant powers the plant, but they also sell it back to the grid. And then to finish the cycle, that CO2 is going to get recharged by the sun and photosynthesis, and the cycle continues. Okay, a little bit, just think about energy considerations here. I've used this term dry anaerobic digestion as opposed to wet. Most anaerobic digestion that maybe you're familiar with, like what happened at a wastewater treatment plant, you're dealing with a very wet biomass, and sometimes you'll even add water to a biomass to get the water content high enough. But if you think about it, that's adding a lot of weight to the biomass when you're adding water. And so rather than doing that, they have a percolate that they run through their through the ground up food waste, and add minimal amount of water, and that makes the biomass less heavy. Remember, you got to transport it all the way down to that composting facility, and it also eliminates the need for them to dry it prior to transport and prior to composting that, and that's another energetic process, the drying process. So better not to add water if you don't have to. Now, this technology, it's German technology. It's not widely used in the U.S. This was the first large-scale one built in the U.S. It was commissioned in 2014. The composting facility was preceded by about 10 years. But I just want to go over, quickly the process. There's a video online through Green Waste, and Green Waste Corporation runs both these facilities under contract with the city and county. So just to get this out, what we basically have in the building there is access hall, and there's actually 2 sets of digesters on either side of the access hall, but we're just showing one. And material will come in the receiving bay, get dumped into this large area that's part of the access hall. There'll be some sorting that goes on, mechanical and human involved in that. The material is going to then be put into digesters. For some amount, I'll show you that, and biogas will be gathered, and then finally goes to a settling bay, from which it will be shipped down to Gilroy for composting. Okay, so let's just walk through it a bit. Here's this is obviously an artist's rendition. It's not that clean looking in there. I just took a tour Friday. I'll show you a couple pictures, but this is more pleasant to look at. This is what the material actually looks like. Now, when they're dealing with compostable material from restaurants, they did an analysis. About 47% of it is non-compostable materials, mostly plastic. One thing, they wish, and it would be nice if it were more like Japan for them, where you have garbage bags need to be clear so you can see what's inside. That would help them a lot. But this is, it's just kind of daunting. This is what they have to deal with, and eventually it's going to be a relatively clean compost in the end. Now, I should also point out that, taking where Deirdre left off, the compostable plastics right now, yeah, there's an issue with them actually not being compostable in facilities, but that's moot because it just gets sorted out with the rest of the plastics. If anything, it creates some more difficulty because it just makes everything more difficult to recycle. It's easily confused with petroleum-based plastic. So for now, that's no solution. Okay, so they do the sorting. They will use a front loader to stuff it into one of these digesters. This is interesting, a little bit non-intuitive, but what they do at first is to add air to the system, and that helps actually get, this basically composting, just gets the pile up to temperature. After that, they'll turn off the air and then allow the facultative aerobes to consume the oxygen. It becomes anaerobic, and then they start spraying with this percolate, which is just this material that they recycle. It gets sprayed about 3 minutes every hour for 18 days. And they just keep recycling this material. It has the organisms in it, the anaerobes that are doing the fermentations and methanogenesis. And they'll harvest the biogas, which has no color, but they're just kind of showing it here as this material, this whatever color that is. And that goes into the collection chambers you saw earlier. And then after 18 days, they will stop the process, terminate it by injecting air in to the pile for 4 days. That'll kind of finish up any metabolism to help reduce odors. They transfer it to the settling bay for about a week. And then from there, it goes to the Gilroy facility. A little bit about some of the other aspects of other than the process, the organic materials. The building is kept under negative pressure, and so the air is being pumped from the building through these biofilters, which contain wood chips on which microbes are going to be metabolizing volatile organic compounds, reducing the smells coming out of the area. So you're not getting, you can be around the buildings and not really smell what it smells like when you're inside. So that works quite well. And the other thing you have there, as I mentioned, up here to the top left are the biogas fed generators. And those, before the biogas enters into these generators, you can see obviously there's a lot of metals. You need to scrub out the majority of the hydrogen sulfide that comes off of the fermentations inside the digesters. And the standard practice for that, the most widely used, is to use what's called iron sponges. It's basically, often it's wood pellets that are impregnated with iron oxides, and the iron oxides will become reduced and oxidizing the sulfide. And in the process, they turn black. And what you see here, this is not the facility we're talking about, but it's just a picture online showing the cleaning out of one of these iron sponges. So this is inherently not a sustainable process. You have to make this material, it goes to a landfill, and then it has to be replenished. So you need to have two side by side so you can keep one running while the other one's being cleaned out. A more sustainable alternative to this, like similar to that biofilter that you saw, that relies on the capacity of microbes to oxidize hydrogen sulfide. A very simple technology, and it's just to have a packing material that's colonized by a microbial community. And I built had a experimental anaerobic digestion system with the city of Santa Rosa, about 100 miles to the north, and just use the sulfide spring in the area as the inoculum. And the biogas enters into these, just moves through the system, going through this sprinkled water, and the water will have some nutrients. And one of the benefits, I should say, of that facility, that green waste facility, is it's right next to the wastewater treatment plant that releases tertiary water that has nitrate in it, which is even it's a nice electron acceptor. Now, a lot of these systems, they'll supplement they'll have oxygen pumped in, but just adding some air as electron acceptor. But you could even obviate that by just using treated wastewater, using the nitrate in that. Anyway, this accomplishes the same thing as iron sponge, but it never, it can operate continuously, and no need to clear it out and add new material. That's a stable microbial community. This is available. This company from Belgium, licensed in the US as biosulfurics, and would encourage anyone to look into this. And something we discussed recently with the facility, the digester facility there. Okay, well, let's follow the organic waste to the composting facility. Remember, 45 miles down to the south. It's a little overview, and these big sausage looking things are similar to sausage, being stuffed with with organic waste. And you can see this is the stuffing machine here, putting it into this long tube. It's 350 feet long. And yeah, the digestate will be mixed together with food waste from other cities, and they can take about 700 tons a day altogether of material. I should say, that anaerobic digestion will greatly reduce the volume of the solids too. So it's not the same as what got put into the dry AD facility. So it will, what you don't see, these bags, it's basically large aerated static piles. This is an aeration system now. The air is being pumped in and exit through vents in the top. Now, one of the reasons they have to keep it wrapped is, there's food waste that if they did not, they would have, rodents and other vermin. So it stays there for 14 weeks getting aerated. They will then remove it from the bags and cure it in piles. There's a couple of different screening and curing processes along the line here. There's regulations on how much contamination should be less than 0.5%. So you're going from a highly contaminated feedstock, way back from the beginning, to something that's pretty pure organic material. And that will be used for both agricultural purposes. There's a whole system for delivering that and finding farmers who will use these compost, and they will make blends that are combining that with yard waste compost and different mixtures. And also they make this available to landscapers. Now, one of the reasons I show this particular picture, this mixture here, it's a mix of the landscape compost with the food waste compost, and 10% by volume biochar added, and that's going to bring us to the kind of the next idea for research here, and exciting field of biochar co-composting. This has been studied in the past 2 decades around the world, and there's a lot of promising results out there. One other thing I should just bring up in the beginning is that, we say biochar is basically charred organic material, which can be often it's wood waste, but it can vary tremendously, and depending on the temperature at which the pyrolysis occurs. And so we use one word for it, but you will see varying performance, and that really needs to be standardized a little bit better about, what are the differences. Okay, so but the results, and want to tell you a little bit about the research coming out of UC Merced, a large group there, headed by Dr. Rebecca Riles. She's here on the left, and a couple of papers that have come out recently on large scale composting of dairy manure with some mixed in almond waste and biochar. and they've seen dramatic reductions in greenhouse gases. I'll just show you some data from this paper, just real briefly. That's easy kind of to grasp. First of all, let's just look at this one over here. This is methane accumulations over the course of the composting period. And you can see when it's just the compost itself, that the methane emission greatly exceeds that of the one that has that small amount of biochar in it. A part of the mechanism behind that can be seen here, the likely mechanism in the porosity. Having the biochar in there increases the porosity of the compost, and of course that's going to allow for more air with oxygen to penetrate. And anytime you have aerobic metabolism, that's going to supersede those fermentations and methanogenesis that you saw at the digester, which are putting off gases like methane and volatile organic compounds, fermentative waste, and other greenhouse gases like nitrous oxide too. So there's a variety of benefits of adding the biochar. It makes for also a nicer mix that doesn't clump as well. Now, one of the kind of, you could even think of this as a bioassay for the benefit of biochar. It can be seen here in this dairy manure. These are stable flies, which are real pests for the cattle, and makes it difficult having compost piles near the dairy because they reproduce in there. But notice they're not attracted to the biochar, and now that's same mechanism, reducing the fermentative products, and they haven't narrowed it down. What is exactly the thing that's not coming off that the flies are no longer attracted to? But usually it's not attractive to the stable flies. They're not reproducing in it, and this is a general thing that's seen with biochar amended compost with your co-compost biochar. It's just not attractive to flies. A little bit more, on the some of the other benefits of biochar are not even covered. One of the things it does is it sticks to ammonia, actually forms bonds to ammonia, so you get a lot less ammonia off gassing. Then because of that, you'll get less reactions of ammonia with sulfate, with nitrates in the air, nitrogen oxides, and so less formation of these 2.5 particulate matter particles. And so there's a host of benefits that come with this. Now, one of the things, other than just this porosity, the kind of maybe it's a non-intuitive benefit, but when you think about it, biochar, very similar to activated carbon. And activated carbon can be used in like microbial fuel cells and things as a conductive material, and biochar is a conductive material. Again, it depends exactly how it's produced, but why is that a benefit? Well, even in a pile like that's being aerated, there are going to be micro anaerobic zones, and what it basically does is it allows for bacteria that are distant from where the oxygen concentration is higher. It still allows them to deposit their electrons onto oxygen, sending them to other bacteria that are closer to where there's high oxygen levels, who will use it as a terminal electron acceptor. And so these guys that are farther away from the higher oxygen concentrations can do their metabolism. This one, oxidizing acetate as an example, depositing the electrons, doing something other than a fermentation, something other than giving their electrons to methanogenesis. And so that is part of the mechanism. So there's a multiplicity of mechanisms involved that are synergistic here. So very exciting stuff, and there's more on this. Recent put together a small article on our Santa Clara webpage for the UC Cooperative Extension, and yeah, happy to answer any questions.
Oh, great, Michael. Thank you for an interesting presentation. We do have one. This is a practical question. What kind of material is the sausage wrapping that rodents can't chew through? And how long does the material last? And how do you get rid of it when it's no longer useful?
Those are good questions. And I don't, have that. I mean, it's a high mill plastic, and I don't want to say any more than that, but it's a good question. I'll bring that up with Beto Ochoa. He runs the facility, and I don't have that answer.
So I had a question. So what do you think within the state of California, at least, or in larger urban areas, of going to a system like you showed versus more of a traditional system that you talked about, where more water is added and the cost of moving that material around is much greater?
Well, so, yeah, but there's the question like, what direction you're going to move it? Well, I don't know anyone else who is planning the dry ID facility, but that's kind of what the purpose here, is to put the idea out there. There is a lot of just kind of movement toward just doing things as they always have been. This kind of inertia in the field. And so I think demonstrating these things, showing that, hey, it actually works. You're not putting your facility at risk or risking fines, because I should say one of the things, for instance, on that composting facility, they're not just doing it for the benefit, this research for the benefit of lowering greenhouse gases. They're actually under intensive pressure from the Bay Area Air Quality Management District to reduce emissions. And so what we want to show is a lot of these things that are going to improve the process, get energy out of it. They also help you achieve regulatory goals. So,
Oh,
yeah.
great. Well, thank you very much. I think with that,
Pleasure.
we'll move on to Yu Meng, who's our final speaker for today. And she will discuss the results of a need assessment that she conducted for what we do with our household food waste. Yu Meng.
Thank you, Marilu. Are you able to see the slides?
Yes, we can see it now.
Okay, great. Hi, everyone. My name is Yu Meng. I'm a county-based academic serving UCC Riverside, San Bernardino, and the Imperial counties. If you also work in the extension program that I present today, I hope this presentation can spark your interest in working in this area. And if you're from outside organization, I also hope this present opportunities to work with us to generate greater impact. So this household food waste survey project is a collaborative work conducted by Consumer Climate Change Literacy Work Group, led by me and Marisa. And the goal is really to provide consumer education and research on sustainable eating, food waste reduction practices, and understand the impact of climate change on food access and food security in California. So to put that into the context, I think Georgia did a great job in understanding the global view, and the data I present is more towards what is happening in America. So the food waste cost the United States an estimate of $300 billion annually to deal with that. And most of those falls on the consumers. With an average of family of 4, they at least spending $1,500 annually on food that eventually ends up being wasted. And so there's economic and impact as well as food insecurity impact on top of environment, and considering the land that being growing the food end up in being wasted. And look at this picture, you can see it's like the area of California and New York. And then also considering also the water that used to generate those food are also being wasted. So, considering the greenhouse gas emissions, food waste is responsible for about 50% of the landfill mass emissions. So our food makes a long journey from the field to our table. And unfortunately, food is lost at all levels. From going and harvested from on the farm, being rejected at the grocery store for imperfections, spoiling at the buffet line, at a restaurant or at schools, and shelving at home, in the fridge. And nearly half of the waste occurs in the home, making it really crucial to understand, and reduce household waste. Because the land, because of the land, water, energy, and the resource we put into growing the food, so the cost actually accumulates along the food supply chain. So food waste at the consumer level actually carries larger environment and economic cost. This is why our work group decides to target the consumer household food waste to understand, what, when, how, and why. So those questions can help us to set up the baseline and to develop more interventions around that. So we believe that UCNR is well positioned to deliver the consumer education through our community-based programs that constantly involves volunteers, community members, and stakeholders. So household food waste reduction project has an overall aim to reducing household food waste among Californians. It has 3 phases of the study. So the first step is to conduct a needs assessment to have a baseline data on our own staff and volunteers. We want to know if we are really ready and what we can do and what we need to do to be ready and deliver the education to the communities through our statewide programs. Then we can move on to understand our community and then develop more culturally and linguistically appropriate materials for our audience. So to achieve the first phase of needs assessment, we decide to use a household food practice survey to send out to all our statewide programs. So it was the survey was sent out in 2022, and we used a Qualtrics survey, and the link was emailed to all the consumer-facing extension program staff and volunteers. And those programs, including CalFresh Healthy Living UC, Expanded Food and Nutrition Education Program, and CES stands for the Community Education Specialist. That means our own staff. And on top of that, we also send to volunteers like master gardeners, master food preservers, and 4-H positive youth development volunteers. As a result, we have 1,566 UCNR staff and volunteers who completed the online survey in September. And this chart represents how much percent of the participants are from different programs. So you can see that majority of our participants are from Master Garden volunteers. So as I'm presenting the data, I would really encourage everyone to think about your own life and feel free to engage into the chat box, think about your own experience, food practices, and compare to our results. I hope our results not only presenting the opportunities in extension, but also have some implications to your own life. So the first step, we want to know the awareness, how much we aware of there's information about food waste and what information about that. So we asked them, have you heard, seen, ever read anything about the amount of food that is being wasted and the ways to reduce the food that is being wasted? And as you can see, that the master food preserver and master gardener actually have a very high percentage in aware of the food waste and also have seen the information about like how to reduce those food waste compared to our staff in nutrition education program at 4-H positive youth development. And with the we present them like what has been wasted, like the percentage of like 40% being wasted, and the dollar amount being wasted for a family of 4. And we asked our participants to consider themselves compared to the average American? Do you think you're doing better job or, about the same? And I think the majority of our participants think that they are very confident, like they doing better than the average Americans, serving less food, and particularly in Master Gardener program, compared to the least with the nutrition program staff. And then we also ask them about self-evaluate their knowledge of how to reducing food waste. You can also see like Master Food Preserver and Master Gardener has a relative higher confidence that they feel like they know how to reduce the amount of food that they throw away compared to other programs. And 4-H staff actually reported the lowest in very knowledgeable category. And as previous presenter mentioned about the State Bill 1383, which has a goal to reduce food waste by 2025 to implement the short-lived climate pollutant strategy, which is coming very soon. But like, how many of you actually have heard of that? In our program, we found that almost half across the board of different programs never heard of the SB 1383. So there's a great need to really talk about this and the strategies to comply with this state bill. And then we ask about their attitudes and perceived barriers that, what is the top reasons that you used to throw food away. So the most was sometimes I throw out food because I worry about food poisoning, or I want to eat only the freshest food. So, so this actually very consistent, kind of like across in the literature, that the top barriers across all the programs is that the perceived health risk. And so this indicates that when we teach about food waste reduction strategies, we also need to include proper food storage, how to read food labels, and how to determine if it is safe to consume. And for 4-H staff, rated their second highest reason as other people in my household don't like what when I trying to use up the older food. This also revealed that food waste, household food waste, is more than just individual behavior, because the decision to throw away food is consistently influenced by the family members. Thus, when we design education, we need to consider the family dynamic and provide resources that fit the needs of different sizes of household and strategies to support the family as a whole. And secondly, volunteers mentioned that there's a lack of information, and also for Master Food Preserver and Master Gardener volunteers, they also mentioned that purchasing too much is a problem for reducing food waste. When we design any education messaging or education campaign, it's always important to know what motivates people to change their behaviors. So we asked across different programs about think about what can motivate you to reduce your household food waste. This result is very consistent with the general population in the literature, that saving money and wanting to manage home efficiently are usually the top two motivators. But I want to note that, for our volunteers in 4-H positive youth development, the top motivator actually is that they want to set an example for their children. And for volunteers in Master Gardener program is that they thinking about that they can make a difference in their community actually motivate them the most. And also, they also mention about feel guilty about waste in general compared to saving money and managing a home efficiently. So I think this result is really important for us to think about when you reach out to different community, different programs. It's important to tailor your message towards that what people care the most. And then we also asked about what has been most wasted in their families. And this is also consistent with the general population and also in the literature. The fruits, vegetables, and homemade meals were the most common types of food that go into waste in a given week per household. And usually the waste was thrown away through trash bin, garbage disposal, compost at home, or feeding livestock. And for master gardener, the top 2 ways to dispose food waste are the home compost bin and organic pickup service. I think this is also consistent that when we ask a question about like how knowledgeable and how confident you are, reducing food waste, the master gardener volunteers are always on top, and the majority of them are aware of the food waste issues and also the ways to reducing food waste in landfill. Then almost across the programs that around like about 1/3, they all think there's a problem that household food waste is a problem. But the interesting thing is that when we ask them how interested are you in taking actions reducing the amount of food waste, the amount of food your households throw away, you can see although there's like great interest, great percentage in thinking there is a problem, but there's less of interest in making a change. So behavior change is really complicated when you think about this. So it's that first that you need to have the awareness of this is a problem, then you kind of change your attitudes towards taking the action. But in order to take action, you also need to have knowledge and skill set to support that behavior change. So then we ask about extension activities. So on top of individual household practices, we ask them, are you currently doing any education in your community? The majority of survey respondents do not currently teach household food waste reduction strategies. The top 2 reasons are that they don't have curriculum or educational materials, and 30% are says they need training to be able to deliver that education. So then we ask, so what do you think we should develop on the, for educations to reduce food waste? And then our participants suggest the first top 2 are food practice to reduce food waste and also understanding the meaning of food date labels. What means by food practice that including use leftovers and food storage. And additional practice identified were meal planning and food preservations. And the best ways to deliver those are identified was in person and printed materials. The next step, so the first step, we have this internal survey project done, and the next step, we want to learn from our audience. So this second part of the projects was conducted through focus group and is funded by REFAP. And for the focus group, we conducted 6 focus groups, 5 in Spanish, 1 in English, in 6 counties across California. So you can see the map, we're trying to have northern, southern, rural, and urban representatives. And the majority of our participants are female, Hispanic, and with a household mostly in average of 4, and their educations were mostly around like under college. So we asked, are you aware of food waste? And most of our participants says they're aware of food waste that happens at home, in schools, and restaurants. And most wasted food are fruits, vegetables that include edible parts and inedible parts. And the meats that are being wasted are usually inedible, and grain and leftovers. And usually those food are coming from store, and it's very interesting. We find there's some responses mentioned WAKE. WAKE is a special nutrition supplement program for women, infants, and children, where they usually give some foods monthly to support their nutrition needs. And top reasons to throw their food away were because of improper storage, because the food looks, smells bad, or goes spoiled, and those food usually goes to trash, feed animals, feed plants, garbage disposal, and compost. And with leftovers, they usually store and eat later, or make a new meal, freeze, and give to others. So we asked also asked barriers, challenges. So why, what makes hard for you to reduce the food you throw away? The top responses is that they purchasing too much. And, just considering, the bulk purchase at some groceries where they usually have like buy one, get one free or something, that actually you think you are saving money, but when you consider the food that you throw away, is actually maybe not. And then case food preference is a second response. And we also find in the literature is that with usually families with young children actually waste more food compared to family with older children. And mentioned expire quickly, the quality of the food, and also not following shopping list, or picky eaters, I guess, the family not eating the food that they purchased or make. And how do you feel the amount of food you throw away? Majority feels bad or guilty. Some feel sad, just sad to see the food being wasted, and some think they are good with the current practices. What would motivate you to reduce the amount of food you throw away? So majority says saving money, and this is consistent with our internal survey response. And then the second was actually family autonomy. That means like planning with family, knowing what to cook, and making food that the families like to eat actually motivate them to reduce the amount of food thrown away. That kind of goes along with meal planning and organizing. And then lastly is seeing and experiencing hunger. And also there's some responses of participants did mention environmental impact of the foods that throw away. And then we also asked about like, if we're gonna deliver food waste reduction education, what topics that you want to see? So in the blue font means that the topics are also identified by our own staff and volunteers. The orange font is something that is brought up as new from our participants. So planning, shopping, cooking, food storage, and handling excess food. Then participants also mentioned additionally was shopping, shopping with a list and sticking to it, checking products for freshness, making substitutions, and then buying from bulk bins. And also, is another thing was mentioned besides, recipes for leftovers and what to do with leftover is that what to do with fruits and vegetables, especially unfamiliar ones. And the best ways to deliver those education identified by our participants, besides in-person and printed materials, they also mentioned videos. I think this could be a new way for us to think about and include in our education. So as for now, we have done the internal survey project, the focus group with our participants. Next step is to develop toolkits and field testing to see if this toolkit fits our participants' needs. And once we have some evidence, and then we'll do statewide training and evaluation along the way. To summarize that, we really understand there are lots of factors playing the role of food practice, such as, age, size of families, ethnicities, educations of our audience. But with the data we collected, there's opportunities that we can dive deep into the data. So today I only present the data based on the programs because I think it's probably gives more insights to people like in different programs to think about your own audience, what kind of education materials and trainings you are needed for yourself and for our community. And next step, we definitely want to look into more of the toolkit development. Currently, our work group is reviewing existing education materials and to make sure that they are culturally and linguistic appropriate for our diverse audience. But I want to say this is the first study that I know that has been conducted to understand the needs in the extension programs. Also, this research actually filled the gap in understanding low-income communities on their household food waste practice and the barriers. I think by understanding that, it will be helpful for us to better serve our communities and audiences. And last, I want to acknowledge the Consumer Climate Change Work Group and our participants who participate in the survey and focus groups, and also the funding agencies of UCR and REFAD in supporting this project.
Thank you very much, Yu. We had one question in the Q&A about what about evaluating food waste in schools? Do you think you would see something similar?
Yes. So besides this project, we also have some county activities evaluating school food waste. There's very large amount of, it's surprising. You see how much food is being wasted at school. And there's also methodologies to do that and interventions to reduce school food waste. I would love to point that with the resource that we have within the UCR.
Oh, thank you very much. We're nearly at the end of our time allotment, but if anybody had a burning question, if you want to put it in chat, I'll try to ask one of our three speakers. But while we're doing that, I had a question about, you made a comment about that people throw away homemade meals. Is there any data that shows that when you go and get takeout or food from a restaurant that you don't throw that away because you spent more money? Or
I don't know the data on actually, comparing that, but I do feel like the leftovers, including homemade and also the food takes away from like a restaurant, because the leftovers that the response usually say they store it and they either store it, freeze it, or give to others. However, they're still wasted, maybe due to even though they store it, but they really didn't consume it.
yeah, I guess a lead on to that one would be, is there a relationship related to age or a preference for cooking? People that don't like to cook might have more waste.
Yes, there's definitely correlation with like age, the size of families, and also income level. Yeah.
Great. I think we might have one more question here. And why choose low-income households when food waste typically comes from all diverse households?
Yes, so as I mentioned, there's great impact on food insecurity. Think about like the food that they mentioned come from lake, comes from different programs or food banks. If there is a better way that you can do storage, cooking the food that you received, actually gonna have greater impact on food security.
Great answer. Well, thank you for I found your presentation fascinating. So thank you very much. Well, we're out of time, but I just want to thank all our panelists today and Danelle and the other members of the strategic initiative that sponsored this meeting. And I want to urge you to participate in next week's webinar, which will be moderated by Danelle, that will be looking into the topic of food access and equity. So thank you very much for your participation and interest in this webinar. Thank you.